In today's political panel, and joining us right here in the studio, Labor MP Josh Burns. Welcome back, Josh. And Liberal MP Aaron Violi. Same to you.
Greg.
Aaron, why don't we start on nuclear, where we wrapped up with Craig Emerson a little earlier. Josh, I might start with you. This Resolve strategic poll, which puts people with an open mind together with those who might support nuclear power in concept at 41%. Does that surprise you?
I think what the Australian people really don't want is a reignition of the climate wars. You know, they were so tiring for a decade when the coalition were in government that they were just constantly fighting against the rollout of renewable energy, constantly fighting against any form of meaningful climate action. And at the last election, no one lost their seat to anyone who was offering a lower climate target. Everyone who won the election last time who won a seat off someone was a higher emission reduction target, which tells you one thing: the Australian people actually want to see action on climate. They want lower power bills, and they don't want this sort of re-engagement of the climate wars. And I think what the Liberal Party is doing right now is not listening to the Australian people, not listening to the lessons of the last election. Aaron's lost a lot of colleagues who would otherwise have been in this House in seats like North Sydney, Higgins, Bennelong, Reid. I mean, the list goes on, and the Liberal Party is bowling up another, frankly, red herring that is just about not adopting renewables.
People ultimately want to see achievement against those targets, though, don't they? And that's the difficulty Labor finds itself in now. You're at least at 42, according to the advice, but even that might have a question mark around it.
Well, what we have set is that we're going to have one energy policy and one emission reduction policy. And the energy policy is to try and get to 82% renewables by 2030, and we are on a record pace to try and get there. It is a huge industrial task. I know the Liberal Party has been fighting renewables for forever and a day, but that's not our approach. Renewables are the cheapest form of energy. They create jobs in the region. And that's what we're going to get on and deliver.
Well, let's talk about costs then, Aaron Violi. Yep. The government points us towards the AEMO figure of $121 billion being the total transitional cost through to 2050. Is that the number the coalition is intent on beating in order to see off this argument that says it's completely unaffordable?
Well, I mean, it's interesting we talk about cost, and I'll just quickly, I will address that, but I want to address something, a couple of things Josh said. Firstly, I don't think Diley and Fowler had a climate target, so I think that seat moved not because of that. But in a more serious note, there was a lot of promises made around energy in the last election, and the government then opposition made two key promises around energy. They committed to reducing emissions by 2030 by 43%, as you said, Greg. Best hope at this stage is 42, but a lot of the initiatives they've scaled back their offshore wind zones, etc., etc. They've compromised on their EV targets, so there's real question marks about whether they'll get the 42%. And the other promise they made when it came to energy, really importantly, was they promised to reduce power bills for Australians by $275, and it's clear that we're not going to achieve that. So there was a lot of lessons from the election, but there was two core commitments made by Labor that they didn't announce, which they're not going to meet.
Yep.
But to your question around cost, and it's an important question, and we've said very clearly we want to have a mature conversation with the Australian people. It has been quite disappointing in the last week to see some Labor MPs come out with cartoons and memes and make fun. On one hand, they support the safety of nuclear reactors on submarines, but now they're saying it's not safe. Like, let's have a mature conversation. And this is a big transformational change. And the reason we haven't released the cost discussions yet is because we want to systematically and methodically take the Australian people through this. We committed, 3 weeks ago we were being criticised by those opposite for not announcing locations. We've now announced locations. We're engaging in conversations. We will also outline the costs as we move forward. But it is ironic that this government will talk about the costs of nuclear power. But even today in question time, when the Prime Minister was asked about the costs of the capacity investment scheme, which they've already put through as policy, they've not announced that. They refuse to tell us how much it costs. So it's pretty rich. If they're going to talk about the cost of our policy in government, they're not prepared to talk about the cost of their own.
All right, respond to that then, Josh. That's an auction process, and I guess there are market sensitivities about where those auctions go. But is $121 billion out to 2050, is that the full and total cost?
Look, I don't have the 2050 cost, Greg, but I will say this. What we know after report after report after report, where you look at the CSIRO or any of the other independent government agencies, the one thing that is consistent is that the most expensive form of energy is nuclear energy. The most expensive form of energy is nuclear energy. In the United Kingdom, the Hinkler nuclear power plant was it's now costing up to $80 billion. $80 billion for one. They want 7 plants with multiple reactors on each plant. This is a hugely expensive exercise. And Aaron's fair to say we should have a mature conversation. Absolutely. But we can't have a mature conversation if the coalition won't even tell the Australian people how much Peter Dutton's 7 nuclear plants are going to cost. And it's not in the tens of billions of dollars, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. And it's also going to mean thousands of dollars for Australian taxpayers each and every year extra on their power bills.
All right, just timing. And finally on this, Aaron, on the costings,
yes.
In the shadows of election day, the final days of campaigning, or very soon, which is the formulation we were told last week?
Well, Peter said very soon. And let's be clear, and Josh said, we're not anti-renewables. Ted and Peter and the coalition have said very clearly that we want to move from a renewables, gas and coal system to a renewables, gas and nuclear system. And there's a reason you need to do that. Nuclear is the only scalable, zero emissions, baseload, proven technology that exists. That is a scientific fact. And quickly on Hinkler, and I want to address that. I was speaking to Alan Finkel, the former chief scientist, about this. And yes, Hinkler is a nuclear reactor, but there are significant reasons for those delays and costs, and it's not the technology. Let's look at Snowy Hydro. That has blown out as well. So you can't say that one form of technology as a project has blown out. Josh is a Victorian as well. North East Link has blown out. Many projects have blown out. You look at the United Arab Emirates, what they've been able to do. People say they literally had no nuclear system at all. We've got it with Lucas Heights. We've already got regulation. There needs to be more work to do. But as Peter said, we will release the costs as part of this mature conversation. But as I said, it is the only zero emissions, scalable technology that is proven that exists today. And anyone that's serious about getting to net zero by 2050 should be prepared to have the conversation.
All right, well, I reckon we will be having that conversation each and every time you both come back in the studio with us. Let's go to some breaking news this afternoon from the government, Josh Burns. A deal to alter slightly the vaping laws so that a GP's prescription isn't necessary in all cases. Well, not for adults anyway. Does this put a gaping hole in the vaping laws as originally designed? They were pretty watertight first time around. Why such a radical change?
I wouldn't call it a radical change, Greg. What it says is that the change announced or the amendment to the legislation announced this afternoon by the Health Minister is that you still have to access it in a pharmacist. So obviously there are a lot of regulations that a pharmacist would have to go under, as opposed to one of the retail pop-up stores that people I'm sure have seen in their neighbourhoods. So you'd have to purchase a vape at a pharmacist. It'd have to be behind the counter. There'd be restrictions around the nicotine levels. It wouldn't be available to under 18s. I mean, there is a number of safeguards that have been built into these amendments that the Minister for Health has announced. So I think that this is a sensible thing. Ultimately, what we don't want is a generation of young people addicted to the products of Philip Morris and British Tobacco. We've seen the smoking and vaping rates go through the roof. They try and get people addicted via a whole range of flavours, and I think this is a sensible reform to ensure that we reduce the number of people vaping and smoking, not increase it.
All right, you've heard the outline or summary there, Aaron.
Yep.
Now, I think it's fair to say there were significant differences within the coalition between you Liberals and your Nationals colleagues. Does this compromise, in your own mind, make it acceptable now?
So I'll go to that in a second. I just do want to quickly echo Josh in saying that no one wants to see particularly teenagers and children engaging in vapes. Everyone that speaks to principals at schools and speaks to their families acknowledges that this is a huge and significant issue for the community. And there is bipartisan support to find ways to remove this. But this is not a significant change now with this backflip from it's already illegal to buy a vape with nicotine. It's already, that's the law as it is. The government's big change was that you had to go to the GP for health purposes. They've now backflipped on that. And this is the real danger of when you do policy on the run. The reality is, it's been illegal, people are getting it, young people are getting it. We need to put more money into enforcement. We need to put more support into border security. We need to actually enforce the illegal shops and understand that vaping and illicit tobacco are combined. There is a significant black market that's going to exist regardless of this legislation. We need to see the detail, but we need to put more into enforcement and understand this detail a bit more, as it's only been announced today, or in the last half an hour, as you said.
It's worth mentioning, Greg, though, on that Aaron's point, that there are a whole range of criminal penalties for those pop-up stores so that you won't be able to purchase them, they won't be able to stock it. There'll be huge penalties for any retailer trying to sell illegal products.
But that's the challenge that exists with tobacco, and it's had a flourishing black market, hasn't it? What gives you confidence that it's going to work as a model?
At the moment, there's clearly a legislative gap, and that's what the bill that we've put forward tries to address.
Yeah, just on, sorry, and I know we keep jumping in, but on that point, I mean, if you go to any tobacco store now, they are breaking the law. They are selling imported packets of cigarettes that don't follow the Australian packaging regulation. So let's be honest, they're already selling those. They're going to continue to sell illegal vapes. So even if the law makes it illegal, you need to put it into enforcement and shut these shops down through the state police and the AFP. You can't rely, which at the moment we're relying on council health officers to go into these stores that are run by unsavoury types. That's what we need to do to actually crack down and make a difference.
All right. Well, that debate is going to play out in the Senate. You've largely done your work bar amendments in the House. Couldn't let you go, Josh Burns, without some reflections on the distressing attacks on your office last week. There was an outpouring of support in your direction, I think we could say from across the political spectrum. Any confidence that the worst has passed from your point of view and that of your staff?
Greg, I really hope so. You know, it's been a pretty difficult week, and you know, I really hope that my staff are feeling okay. They're great people. You know, I've got some really great people who work for me. They're in politics because they're passionate about politics. I was also really concerned about the residents who are above my office, who, you know, I've spoken to a lot of them, and they're also lovely people and express real concern for my staff. I think it's a reminder that the way in which we engage on difficult issues is so important, and we have to engage respectfully. And I know that across the political aisle there have been people who have been trying to say, you know, Labor this, Labor that, Labor's complicit, all this sort of drumming up of hysteria, but you know, that's had real-world consequences, and I really hope that everyone takes a big reality check, a big deep breath, and engages in politics passionately and proudly, but civilly and respectfully.
Yeah, thank you. Quick final word to you, Aaron, and just briefly.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. I mean, Josh and I can disagree on politics, but Josh is a great person. And people forget politicians are husbands, are wives, are family people. They've got family that love them. Their staff are just there, as Josh said, because they love helping the community. And to see that happen to Josh, but also to other Labor MPs and their staff is really devastating and heartbreaking. And as Josh said, we need to tone down the rhetoric and understand that something that is happening on the other side of the world has a profound impact on a lot of people, but we're limited in what we can do, and we shouldn't be weaponising a tragedy in the Middle East here in Australia. And as I said, people get into politics in the main for the right reason. It was heartbreaking to see what happened. I reached out to Josh, like I know many colleagues did, and we continue to send love and strength and support to Josh and his staff and many others in the Labor Party, because it's not fair what they're going through.
All right, let's see how that is reflected in the Parliament over this week and next. We'll wrap it up there. Aaron Violi, Josh Burns, thanks so much to both. Now, the nation's 27th government